Hello every folks, and welcome to another Ogre Reborn type guide here. Well, I wanted to address cards today. Basically, I've seen them come up very regularly in terms of, how much people want to rely on them, how much they don't want to rely on them, whether they love it, they hate it, they think it's too difficult, they think it's too easy. Quite frankly, comments are all over the place, and all of them are valid in their own ways. But I want to explain why exactly, because it may be a little bit weird to to possibly parse that information in terms of how everybody can kind of be right at the same time, again, to varyingly different degrees. See, it really just comes down to the fact that this game, since, well, technically since back since the SNES, but really since the PSP version, has been very complicated in terms of how everything interacts. That's basically why when it came to kind of previewing this game and whatever else, the general sentiment that I kept trying to get across was it depends. Everything always depends. Everything's always situational. And, well, that's kind of what we're looking at here. So, okay. First things first, are the cards on bosses, for example, anything new? And we will get over to the functions of the cards in just a moment, but are they actually new? Because, let's take a look back at the PSP version real quick. See, right here I have, what it looked like back then, and I want to explain why some folks feel that it's unnecessarily difficult, why some folks just feel like it's exactly right, and why some folks feel that it's easy. So, let's look at this here. So, we have to understand about the PSP version is that there was a lot more passive stuff going on building-wise. There were 10 slots for building different things, and typically this tended to lead to situations where, keeping the actual thing balanced was a hell of a thing. Like, when the One Vision overhaul ended up coming about, it ended up removing almost all of these, just like Reborn did, because quite frankly, it is a monster of a thing to keep balanced. Because one little tweak would effectively throw an entire fight out of whack, and if somebody has availability for all of these skills literally out of the intro, crazy shit will happen, for lack of a better way to put it. Like, for example, right here, let's take a look at Branton, okay? In terms of, oh no, they started off with cards, it's unfair. Spellcraft 2, this was the equivalent of those two magic cards that they would have gotten there. They've got Channeling, they've got Expand Mind, and they've got Tactician 2, which, to varying degrees, are functionally more than equivalent to those two cards of MP Regeneration that he's got. Spell Strike 2, which increases spell accuracy by 60%. Fortify 3, which would effectively be the equivalent of him being able to completely ignore 3 ranks of Fizz Up cards, as well as Silence Proof, as well as the fact that he's got some of the most stacked stats in the game, right? So basically what we're looking at here is a situation where he's already got way more than he does in Reborn in the PSP version. He's effectively got way more stuff stacked for him, but wait a minute, we all remember him as being fairly easy. Because the actual difficulty of that fight has absolutely nothing to do with the stats, the cards, or whatever else, but the fact that all of his dudes have Engulf, okay? Most of the time, these two, these casters back here, these Fusiliers, these archers, most of the time what would happen is people would run in, they would carve through these relatively low defense Terror Knights here. They usually would not even get a chance to trigger any of their fear effects. These archers would usually get one-tapped, these Fusiliers would get one-tapped, these casters would get one-tapped, and then it's just Branton occasionally taking out a couple of your units, and that's it. Functionally speaking, you were not actually forced to engage with any aspect of this fight. How did Reborn handle it? Well, effectively all of them have +6 range. They have Engulf, they have +3 books and staves and things like that, and so they're able to get all of their attacks off sooner. Their overall bulk is increased so that you're actually, seeing them around in the fight longer. The Fusiliers come in with more ways to get around your formations. The Terror Knights have their skills triggering essentially at the start and end of their turn, with Lament having a chance to do it at the start, Fearful Impact having a chance to trigger it afterwards. And on top of that, Branton's coming in with +8 range in his own right, plus higher stats, plus you've got the New Game Plus variants of all of these showing up on the basic version. I know I'm kind of confusing people here, but point being, they have extra spells that you would have had to be in a New Game Plus cycle for in the original PSP version. So for folks that have never done a challenge run and never, actually engaged with any of these mechanics, he's suddenly terrifying. Not to mention, he's always had a special AI, even back in the PSP version, so he's always done the whole, using his units as bodyguards thing, but the PSP, I guess, couldn't handle the AI in more situations, so it was only certain boss fights that got it. Any dang ways, so the difference is not that it's suddenly more difficult, it's just that you're suddenly forced to actually use the mechanics that were already there. Anyway, so that's kind of the general gist of where that's coming from, but okay, let's get back into what these cards actually do, because all of them are skills that were effectively already available in the PSP version in different ways. Like, for example, that Fortify that I mentioned earlier is partially the reason that you may not notice how strong many of the actual PSP bosses were, because, well, quite frankly, they were coming in with, like, let's say they would have strength in rank 1 or 2. That is, like, let's say 30 to 45% bonus damage that they should be getting, but you've already packed a counter, you've packed Fortify. That skill suddenly does not work. So basically, yes, we're looking at a situation where you just never had to see that skill take effect before. But, okay, so looking at these different cards here, the most common by far are going to be the skill up cards. These effectively increase the chance of your auto skills to trigger. Now, until we have exact numbers, to me, this feels like roughly a 10% increase in the chance for those things to trigger. Uncommon ones will still remain uncommon. Like, for example, something like Phalanx is, I would say, roughly about 40% odds. This might put it up to like 50% odds, that kind of thing. So if you end up stacking a few of them, the odds of them working are pretty good. But generally speaking, you can usually rely on one of them and it'll be just fine. You don't really want to rely on any of these cards as part of your overall strategy. Usually the recommendation is that, if they're on the way there and you can just take a slightly different route to pick it up, great. If it's more than one turn away, forget that it even exists. There's no point in trying to focus on that. But okay, so those just increase your odds of your auto skills triggering. Generally, for most units, they won't necessarily need one, but for example, like you've got something like a Buccaneer here, they have a chance to to have effectively super armor skills. It might be worth picking one of those up on them. But again, don't go out of your way to do that. Something like a Knight, if you want them to be very tanky, might be worth picking it up on them. Something like a Cleric or Archer will typically already be in the backfield, and they probably will have a few cards spawning nearby them, and nobody else to really do anything with. So, what the hell, why not? You might as well just go and pick them up. But again, don't really put them into risky positions to do so. Now, the next up is going to be the Fizz Up card. This is effectively the equivalent of Strengthen from the PSP version. Essentially translating to somewhere in the ballpark of 15% bonus damage for your physical attacks. Now, the way that this one will actually require a little bit of explanation. So when it comes to bonus damage, it's not just your number go up by 15% in all situations. There's basically 3 steps to the armor calculation. You've got your physical stats check, that's the first phase. You've got your second phase, which is scaling. That's where the Fizz Up comes in. And then you've got your third step, which is the hard armor calculation, which is where the magic card comes in. So basically, the Fizz Up card will give you 15% bonus damage if you're able to overpower the other guy. So for example, if I have this lady over here go take a whack with her stick, and it does 1 damage versus this guy, she can pick up 4 Fizz Up cards, it will still do 1 damage versus this guy. Because she is a spellcaster, her physical stats are not very high, she will not be able to overpower that guy. She does not have the muscular fortitude to break his biceps. So, for example, somebody like Canopus over there, good stats, he's got a big beefy weapon, he's got the skills to match it, and he's got a bunch of, potential things benefiting him there. He will have no problem overwhelming most units, meaning that in most cases he will do consistent damage, meaning that physical up card will definitely be worth it for him. What's interesting though is then you also get some cases where the scaling seems a little bit incongruous. So for example, the Archer here. By default, if we look at them, they have cases where, they're going to do okay but not insane damage against most units. But at the same time, as soon as they bypass armor, they're able to scale much harder. So in the case of archers, what they're able to do here is if you're able to get their skills high enough, they will eventually start getting past those physical checks at the start. If you get their dex and strength high enough, they will start completely, blowing past armor here. At which point, you can start kind of taking advantage of those Fizz Up cards. Bear in mind, there are debuffs that can make this work as well. So one particularly fun one, if you want to absolutely just laugh at the face of anything tanky, take a Terror Knight, combine it with, like, let's say the simplest version is a Zwei +1. with a breach effect on there. Now, bear in mind there are axes that can do this too. But you can do this with a Zwei, with a Volge. Can do this with pretty much anything. But the easiest way is, again, that Zwei +1. You get Dynast King's Mead right off the very first battle there, so you definitely have at least one on hand. Anyway, Breach plus Frighten. Breach increases any incoming damage versus a particular unit by roughly 15%. Well, 15 to 20%. It's a little bit. I've heard different stories as far as how that goes, but we'll assume 15%. And then you combine that with, let's say Frighten. So that's why you're bringing the Terranite in for this equation. Because the Terranite hits, it has a 100% hit chance on that terrifying impact, and ends up guaranteeing the Breach and Frighten, and then you follow that up with the Archer. The Archer scales very well, but can't deal past armor. That Terranite just completely opened up something's armor, and that Archer's coming in with +3 range double shot, with a crit bonus on there, with instills on there. They're suddenly throwing out, 1,000+, whereas before, they were doing maybe 10. So, point being, everything always depends. So those Fizz up cards, like right here, if you were to pick one of these up, this potentially might go up by 200 to 300, but many of these other units on the team won't get that much of a benefit from it. So that's kind of why you want to think about it. In most cases, like even for a heavy hitter, what you probably want to focus on is something more along the lines of a crit card. So the crit cards are interesting because the crit cards effectively unlock your ability to do a critical. You still have a natural critical chance, but it's tied to knockback. So, for example, if your luck is particularly high, basically every character has a individual, luck that's going up or down every single day. But basically, if they're having a very lucky day, they can potentially be in one of those situations where they're suddenly going to be able to do a bunch of knockbacks. So they hit a crit, they will knock a unit back. If they pick up a crit card, though, that means that suddenly they can, do a full double damage crit. Units cannot crit without picking up one of those cards, at least not double damage crit without picking up one of those cards. Okay? But your chance to do one of those crits will increase with every one of those cards you pick up. I want to say they feel roughly in the ballpark of about 20% per card, but by far the craziest damage that you can get is, for example, getting a high scaling unit with 3 Fizz up cards and 1 crit card. Now, do you want to plan around this? No, it makes no sense to attempt to plan around this. You can spawn new cards through different methods. Like, for example, if you didn't know, if you break props, you can spawn new cards. In fact, it's one of those things that makes fire and lightning users particularly handy, because a lot of times they'll, like, if you've run into those situations where sorry, once again I'm having one of those moments where it's like I'm trying to explain one mechanic and I'm just seeing all the branches going off in my head here. But if for example, you have fire and lightning overhead spell users in your team, you may have had those moments where you're like, hey, there were way too many cards spawning, the entire map is covered with them. Oh no, the spawn rate is too high. But it doesn't have a thing to do with the spawn rate. What happened is that every time that you broke a grass or dirt tile, or rather grass or snow tile, and you ended up triggering another one of those cards to spawn in. So basically this applies to any prop. So if you end up throwing a rock at a statue, like for example, if we were to hit this thing for 4 damage, it would end up spawning another card right there. This does mean that, yeah, you might just get a bunch of skill cards off it, but if you have a squad that's retreating, it's sometimes worth targeting a prop with another unit in order to make sure that you can get it. And, inevitably, of course, there's going to be the comment that comes in saying, oh, I targeted it, it was just a skill card. I'm not going to sit there attacking a statue for 4 turns. Well, don't attack a statue. Like, this is an exception. Most props at this point have their health reduced to 1. So, like, for example, a tree takes a while to chop down, a statue takes a while to break down. Something like a shrub or, a small patch of dirt, a little, little box in the way, those are going to have 1 health. So realistically, that is going to be a pretty solid way to go if you really, really, really want to have more cards. Anyway, so back to what they actually do now that I've gone on yet another tangent. When it comes to your Fizz up cards, they will scale up very well, but when it comes to your magic cards, they will only increase your ability to penetrate defenses. So, for example, if you've noticed that magic seems very consistent against most things, this is why. Because effectively, they're able to... it's not even really doing the stats check for the most part. Like, I believe it only checks resistance, rather than resistance and vitality, like you used to in the PSP version. Which means that they're very consistent for being able to deal with you know, different types of armor and that kind of thing. They're able to hit heavy units this time around. So... basically what we're seeing is, sorry, a random minor pause there, my nose was really bugging me. Anyway, so all that we're seeing in that situation is that they will be doing consistently more damage. So like if they go up by 50, they're just suddenly ignoring like 50 some odd defense, right? So they're able to ignore armor on the back end of the calculation. Basically, at the very end of everything, the armor of the unit is checked against the attacker's weapon and skills. So, like, you know, the skills will increase it by a certain amount. It's stacked on top of the weapon, and then stacked on top of whatever the original calculation came up with after scaling. And then from there, you're able to kind of come up with your final number. All right, so there we go. Now, just so you know, something to kind of address here real quick while we're kind of talking about damage bonuses. In terms of, like, I feel like a lot of times there have been misattributed kind of numbers flying around in terms of folks saying that they were one-shotting bosses. Now, I did come up with another video recently that I'm almost positive is going to get completely misunderstood here. In terms of how much effect those cards actually have versus the boss. Like, they will essentially... like scale up what is already there. Like, they'll increase the effect of your good choices up to that point, but they won't accomplish anything they wouldn't have already accomplished otherwise. So, for example, using a mid-game boss, you know, as show and tell here, we had, in that case, Pharrell, a boss with around 750 health, who is largely resistant to physical damage, who is then hit for a one-shot with Canopus with a dagger. Now, Canopus is at a lower level, but what does that actually translate to, you know, effectively here? So, the reason for all of it will, I guarantee, be largely attributed to the Fizz Up card that he got, as well as the crit card. Now, the crit, yes, the crit did a massive portion of that. But, when it comes to the Fizz Up card, it was really only increasing his damage by roughly 50 to 100. It is not enough, like, increasing damage, like, you could increase it by 400. If you have one unit doing 400 extra damage, it still will not be enough by itself to win you a fight by itself. Because in most cases, you'll be seeing situations where, you know, one unit, regardless of how much their damage is, will still be able to be completely run over by a mob of other similar units. That's kind of what I love about the balance in this particular one. That you still have that feeling of one unit is still one unit. So even if, for example, you have a case where a boss were to spawn in with 4 physical up cards, it doesn't matter. There's still one unit. There's a reason that once you get by the to the very end, a certain, you know, last boss kind of character ends up getting 4 or 5 more turns than everybody else, because it would just be a complete curb stomp otherwise. So, anyway, hopefully that makes at least a little sense, but just kind of throwing that out there before it inevitably ends up coming up. Okay, so next up, as far as our next cards there, we have the, you know, the crit cards. We already largely discussed those. But then we have the MP regeneration cards. These are roughly the equivalent of both your MP and TP regeneration from the PSP version, except combined. The reason for this is, again, the MP bar functions largely like the TP bar. Alright, so, yeah, on the MP cards, they essentially will not give you anything in the immediate time. They will just increase your passive regeneration. Generally speaking, those are very good for example, casters or finisher spammers, especially finisher spammers. But either way, you know, everyone's mileage will potentially vary. Any dang ways, I think that's about it for what I wanted to cover this time around. Obviously, there's going to be a million and one different mechanics to go over, but hopefully that helped explain some things. Additionally, also, so the rules on this seem to be a little inconsistent. But basically, when your MP goes up, also your natural regeneration ends up going up. So this has kind of led to an interesting thing where those MP bonuses may potentially be a bit more valuable than they seemed. Now, to what degree, I still don't know. That's something that I've tried testing in different situations, and honestly, the results have been a little inconclusive. Like, for example, I've been testing whether you can more or less kind of region lock yourself in right in front of the Pharrell fight in Chapter 2, and seeing if you might be able to, well, fire all of your units, sell all of your items, and still be able to make a comeback without any class that has a recruit. So, any darn ways. That will be that. That's really all I wanted to cover on these cards, so hopefully this was kind of helpful information here. And if you have any further questions, do feel free to let me know. Again, just remember, physical up cards are just going to be good for your heavy hitters. They're not going to make anybody that's not already a heavy hitter do anything any better. Your magic up cards are good for your spellcasters just overall, but it's not going to make your healers heal anymore, because healing is its own thing. Crit up cards are basically good for everybody, except for healers. But potentially could even be abused for knockback mechanics. So, for example, a Cudgel may do 1 damage, but it might be worth hitting something with a crit in order to knock it backwards off a wall, which is potentially something to consider. Then you have then you've got your skill up cards, which again are generally just going to be available enough that they're going to be good for pretty much everybody. Usually, again, most of the characters that need them are going to have them spawning just around them within walking distance anyway, so nothing too crazy to really worry about there. And yeah, I think that more or less covers it. So y'all have a good one, take care, and if there's any questions they have a mechanical question on, feel free to let me know. I'll try to get everything as much as I can. Obviously, the numbers have been going a little bit wild as of lately, so I'm doing my best to try to keep up with all of it. I'm trying, dang it. There's still hundreds I haven't touched, but eventually I'm trying to get to them. So, y'all have fun, take care, and if there's any questions, of course, do let me know. Later.